Hello, God bless you, and welcome to episode 27 of Unshackled Life Q&A. It's good to be back, and I want to thank everyone who was praying regarding my surgery. My name is Woodard, and I'm a Bible teacher and assistant pastor at Nacogdoches Christian Fellowship and founder of Unshackled Life Ministries in Nacogdoches, Texas. These Q&As cover questions about God, the Bible, and theology, and we will examine the questions from a biblical perspective and using biblical thinking, meaning approaching the question from a biblical worldview and using the text in context with the passage where it is found, as well as keeping it in context and agreement with the entirety of Scripture. At the end of the Q&A, I will give you ways to ask your own questions for future episodes. Also, I would like to thank the person who asked the question we will be covering today. So let's get to it. Question: why are there two different and contradictory accounts of King Saul's death? There are two ways to look at the accounts of Saul's death, either as two different accounts or one long version of the same narrative, but either way, there is no contradiction. Before I explain why these passages don't contradict, let's look at both. It will also be immediately obvious why some see these as differing and contradictory. The first is in the last chapter of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 31. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men, on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head, and stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines, to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. That is the entire and final chapter of 1 Samuel, and the most important thing to note is how this is told. This is the historical account, what 1 Samuel tells us happened to King Saul. Now let's look at the first chapter of 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verses 1 through 16. After the death of Saul, when David had returned from striking down the Amalekites, David remained 2 days in Ziklag. And on the 3rd day, behold, a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. And when he came to David, he fell to the ground and paid homage. David said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." And David said to him, "How did it go? Tell me." And he answered, "The people fled from the battle, and also many of the people have fallen and are dead, and Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead." Then David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" And the young man who told him said, "By chance I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear, and behold, the chariots and the horsemen were close upon him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me, and I answered, 'Here I am.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' And he said to me, 'Stand beside me and kill me, for anguish has seized me, and yet my life still lingers.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and so did all the men who were with them. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son and for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And David said to the young man who told him, "Where do you come from?" And he answered, "I am the son of a sojourner, an Amalekite." David said to him, "How is it you were not afraid to put your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David called one of the young men and said, "Go, execute him." And he struck him down so that he died. And David said to him, "Your blood be on your head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed." That definitely looks and sounds different, and it contradicts the account in 1 Samuel. In the first version of Saul's death, Saul fell on his sword, killing himself before he could be taken captive. In the second account, a young man claims to have done what Saul's armor-bearer refused to do in 1 Samuel, and that is the key to understanding that there is no contradiction. This unnamed young man claimed to kill Saul. Notice that the second account is told like the first, simply telling us what happened after Saul's death. The passage isn't telling us what happened to Saul, but rather what happened after his death. This account shows us what David believed happened to Saul, at least at first, because someone foolishly and mistakenly thought they could curry favor with David by claiming to dispose of David's enemy and obstacle to the throne, or by showing mercy to the dying king David remained faithful to, even during years where Saul had been trying to kill him. We don't know which motive, because we are just given the account of what happened and not the motive behind it. But it helps if we look at this as one long narrative rather than two separate accounts. King Saul went into battle, and sometime after his sons were killed, Saul was severely wounded. He ordered his armor-bearer to finish him off so that he wouldn't be captured and tortured before dying. The armor-bearer refused, and Saul said, "Fine, I'll do it myself," falling on his sword. Those are facts from 1 Samuel, but something else happened that we must gather from the 2 Samuel account. This young man, the Amalekite, whoever he was, happened upon the scene. We know he was there because he showed up before David with the king's crown and armlet. It's possible that the man overheard Saul asking his armor-bearer to kill him, but it's also possible that he simply could tell that the dead king he had come upon had fallen on his own sword. He looted the body, taking the crown and the armlet, and left the area. The next day, the Philistines found Saul's body, cut off his head, and put his body in one of their cities, and his armor in the temple, to show the power of their gods over their enemies. 3 days later, someone from Saul's camp, the man who had taken the crown from the body of Saul, showed up at David's camp. He most likely believed he would be rewarded by David, although, again, the text doesn't give us his motives. For whatever reason, he lied and took credit for killing Saul. Unfortunately for him, the future king believed him. David, who had refused more than once to kill Saul and take the throne that God had promised him, didn't approve of the claimed conduct of the man at all, and rewarded him by having him killed for striking down the Lord's anointed. So you see, there is no contradiction. Saul killed himself after being wounded. Someone thought he could advance himself by claiming false credit, and it backfired, costing him his life. All right, thank you for listening. I hope the answer to today's question helped you in some way. If you have a question about God, the Bible, or theology, you can email your question to DalenWoodard@minister.com. That's DalenWoodard@minister.com. Or go to the Unshackled Life Ministries Facebook page and ask there or through DM. Find me, Dalen Woodard, on X, what used to be Twitter, and ask there, or reply to this video on YouTube. May the Lord bless you and keep you and give you an ever-deepening hunger for His Word. Help us spread the word by sharing, commenting, and clicking that like button. Keep up to date on the Q&As by subscribing to this channel. And remember, when you fix your thoughts on God and build your thinking on the foundation of His truth, God fixes your thoughts.